Dear friends, welcome to another episode. Today in the military world. In this video we'll talk about the expansion of the United States nuclear umbrella, about Japan over the United States and R. Doing this, the Thunderbell boot is very versatile for urban tactical use and even as AP, because it has a ballistic umban system made of the very soft palmallisha. And with comfort-based collision is 100% guaranteed to ensure the comfort here in its highestecone, and the boot is 180% guaranteed to the Nuboli defection, now in the Urbon defected to the Urbon. Defectile, made for its ultivity of tactical use of Trilasal use of Tactical Urbanas and even asseyard IPI that we're going to talk about the episode today. In this video we'll talk about the AP of the Urbanet world and even asseumberly way to talk about the epi-speuration system, and even how AP, because it has an epipple, because it has an epivertsion. We're going to talk about how to speak to say it ascendous days way to talk about it about to speak. Our nuclear umbrella concept, it consists basically in a promise made by a country armed with nuclear weapons to protect allied countries that don't have this kind of armament. This policy was formalized and widely employed during the Cold War, and the United States offered guarantees nuclear dissuasion to its allies in Western Europe and in Asia as an answer to the threat of the Soviet Union is to dissuade. The Soviet Union is to dispute hostile nuclear war, which is to discourage nuclear war, which is to discourage nuclear war, which is also to united nuclear warfare, by which the conceptual dissuance to be beyond simple nuclear attacks, being conceptual dissuance by the simple nuclear responsorial dissuasion, by the simple nuclear dissuasional dissuasion to their allies. Dissuctional nuclear warfare, dissuctional defectional defections of nuclear dissuctional defections of it, by any number. Nuclear war fight is also tools and highestecone defects, by any way, is told. That's why seen as a sort of military alliance, but not as binding as, for example, the OTAN. The United States currently offer this umbrella to over 30 countries, including nations in Pacific as Japan and South Korea. These arrangements not only increase regional security, because also limitates nuclear proliferation to increase nuclear proliferation to more than 30 nations in America, but also create adversar warranties ASI, the opponents of North Asia and Northia Asia, ASI Asia as Japan, and nuclear presence as often consider a role in nuclear and North Korea central to ensure stability in front of threats from nuclear powers like China and North Korea. We will now analyze in detail how this relation works in relation to three key allies, starting from Japan. Since the Second World War has recently held under the United States nuclear umbrella as part of the United States' nuclear umbrella as part of the United States' Cooperation and Mutual Security Treaty and Mutual Security signed in the last year, due to increase in the North Korea that between 2006 and 2017 held the nuclear power. Enlarged, involving discussions that they included simulations of scenario for the use of nuclear weapons, marking an even closer cooperation between the two countries. The South Korea, another great ally of the United States, also depends strongly on the American umbrella in front of the UK's nuclear umbrella before the growing nuclear weaponry in front of the growing North Korea's cooperation that currently possesses about 50 nuclear warheads and preventing its own nuclear arsenal to remain as a strategic ally of the States United in the region. In 1951, Australia, New Zealand, and United States signed the ANZUS, a similar treaty to signed with Japan, despite the New Zealand suspended its participation in the 1951 Australia by banishing the presence of nuclear weapons in their territory. The United States guaranteed nuclear protection in both countries in case of conflict, enforcing the dissuasion in the new 2C30s for decades. That the great motivation of its treaties has now increased its participation in the 1000s, by which the greaterance of the 1930s, by the 1930s, by the 1930s, by the 1930s, by the 2530s, by the 1930s, by the 1930s, by now have been increasing their participation in the 1951, Holland by banishing the United States by banking of nuclear weapons, by banking of nuclear weapons, by banking in the 1951, Cilia, and in the United States by banking of nuclear weapons, and in the United States by Bonkisht. By 1951, Eland and time have exceeded to 1951, nuclear and the arsenal that includes ballistic missiles intercontinentals capable of Hitting targets anywhere in the United States. Beijing is doing all this with one purpose: to create a force of dissuasion that can defy the American military supremacy, to reinforce the precision, weapons and technologies of contradiction, to maximize its flexibility in the eventual conflict. But all this armamentist race is not happening in the vacuum, the United States also reflecting the regional break with one of the main measurements of this particular environmentalment to contain the intensification of this particular region in this matter being so far to the Japan to contain the main ambitions of the continental, to contain the key ambitions of the main formants of the continuance of the continued to the extent of the continental guidings in this matter being solier the-attractional measurements of this particularness of contradictionalness, asseyardal measurements of contradictionality, of contradictional measurements of contradictionality, of contradictionality, of contradictional measuremental weaponship and technologists. They have to maximize their flexibility. Reality is doing soul of the regional threats about evolution of the bilateral relationship between the United States and Japan. This expansion goes beyond the traditional support, incorporating new security measures and dissuasion, as for example the creation of regulating consultations between the two countries allow Japan to have a more active voice in the use of nuclear weapons, although the final decision remains with the President of the United States. This dynamic collaboration of the increasing the advanced capability of Japan to detect and intercept ballistic threats, especially coming from North Korea. But why Japan not only accepted as even incentivates this nuclear expansion is a country with a complex relationship with nuclear weapons due to trauma of Hiroshima and Nagasaki attacks, but yet the increasing aggressive aggression of China and North Korea has taken the gradual acceptance of the idea of a more robust nuclear disputment to many. Nuclear society continues to ensure the national security and sectivate theme of increasiveness, and national society continues to ensure theme of increasiveness and Nagasaki attacks and Nagasaki attacks and national security and Nagushin attacks and Nagasaki attacks and Nagasaki attacks and national security and Nagasakiament and national security and nationalistiament and aggressiveness and Nortilial attacks, and yet Espionage dependence even more of nuclear weapons. Even though the perception of external threats has driven the Japanese security policy in more pragmatic directions, the Japanese literally felt in the skin the horror of nuclear weapons, and is just to prevent that they are so interested again, that they are so interested in the nuclear umbrella of their greatest and most powerful ally, and yet not inscribed on the channel yet.